Good morning to all participants. I, Bhavin Mehta, Assistant Professor of Biomedical Department, LDC. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of this FDP, Dr. Rajesh Vasita sir. We welcome you, sir. He did his doctoral study from IIT Kanpur and completing postdoctoral training at the Center of Nanomedicine and Tissue Engineering from University of Milan, Italy. Currently, he is working as an assistant professor in School of Life Science at the Central University of Gujarat. Sir has major interest in developing different biomaterial based scaffold that mimic the physical, chemical and biological characteristics of in vivo system. Now I would extend it to Dr. Rajesh Vasida sir for talk on advanced biomaterial for healthcare and characterization of polymeric material. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhavinji. Am I audible and my PPT is visible?
Yes, sir. You are audible and your screen is visible.
Perfect. Okay. So, uh, good morning, everyone. Good morning, all respected teachers, all the participants. Uh, Myself is Rajesh. I am primarily working in the area of uh, basically biomaterials, and within biomaterials, I primarily work on polymeric biomaterials with a certain applications such as bone tissue engineering or developing a co-culture devices. So my basic training was in biology, and then eventually I moved into material science. Right? So I'm neither a good biologist nor a good engineer. So I'll try to give you interfacial information how biologists look at the material and how a material person or a engineering person should look at the biological problem, right? So rather than focusing on what I'm doing, I would try to focus on what exactly is mimicking or scaffolding in biomaterials, and we'll see with few examples that how things are advancing. So I'm not going to discuss what is known or what is being published a lot. I'll try to touch on those aspects which are currently pursuing in the field of biomaterials. So before starting into the mimicking approach of biomaterials, I would just like to introduce you a couple of the concepts which are very essential for every biomedical person. So these days we are keep talking about regeneration. Can we regenerate? Can we regenerate limbs? Can we regenerate human organs and so and so? So if you look at regeneration is probably the most fascinating word in human life. Every one of us would like to have capacity of regeneration, right? And it's the biggest human fascination, and everyone wants to live as long as possible. And the reason or the cause behind extending the life is, can we understand regeneration? Can we promote regeneration? Can we understand how to trigger the regeneration? So if you look at some of the organisms, very early organisms like worms, or some of these amphibian organisms like planaria or salamander, we must have a read in our undergraduate courses that if you take off any of these component of planaria, the upper part or middle part or the lower part, it eventually regrow whatever the section been taken off, right? So even in the planaria, you take out the upper part, lower part, or middle part from any of the region, the organism will develop the remaining body and eventually it will regenerate. This is a very small organisms, but if you go to some higher organisms like amphibian organisms, or many times in some of the frogs, salamander, it's a very famous experiment. We must have observed in our home also that if you hit this gecko or salamander on wall, they generally leave their tail. Similarly, salamanders, if you cut the limbs, eventually their limbs are regrowing. Similarly, in geckos, we generally observe that their tails are slowly regrow. That means some of these organisms, early organisms, have a capacity called regeneration. So, in a layman language, regeneration is a natural process by which our tissue can regrow, our organ can regrow. if you look at animals, smaller animals or simplest animals to most complex animal like humans and some of other mammalians, this capacity of regeneration is keep declining. So if someone take off any human organ, it will not regenerate. Yes, a small wound, a small injury may regenerate. However, the capacity of our regeneration in mammals is very, very limited. If you look at some of the reason of poor regeneration in human, many of our tissue have a very limited regeneration capacity, and especially when we become 25 or 30-year old, our regeneration is almost freezed in some of the tissue. Take an example of like cardiac tissue, muscle tissues, cartilage. These are the tissue which does not grow once it reaches to maturity. Only thing happen in those tissues are they start degrading or they start degenerating over a period of time. And the evidence of arthritis, cardiac arrest, loss of memory or many of the neural disorders are the evidence that these tissues are not replacing, these tissues are not regenerating again. However, we have some tissues like liver, bone, skin. These are the tissues which have some extent of regeneration, and they are keep regenerating themselves. However, right? So, what do we have? We have very limited number of tissues which can regenerate over a period of time, whereas some of the tissues stop regenerating after they reach to adulthood. So, the first and most important problem with human beings is that we have age-related degenerations. Like I gave you example of cartilage, cardiac tissues, muscles. The second reason for loss of regeneration is that in human, if we lose or if a patient lose large amount of tissue, that tissue cannot be regenerated. A small amount of injury, small amount of fracture can be healed by bone or skin. However, if the burn injury is more than 10%, you will always observe a scar formation on the patient. There is no normal skin regenerated back. So, in most of those situations, those tissues cannot be regenerated. And of course, there is one more situation called disease. So, we have many age-related disease like Alzheimer, Parkinson, osteoarthritis. So, these are the diseases which gradually degrading our tissue, degenerating our tissue, and we do not have any control over them. We cannot stop the degenerations, we can slow down, and furthermore, we cannot regenerate. So, the challenge for us is that we have a very, very limited regeneration capacity, and we don't have any ways to enhance it. So far, you might have looked many of these kind of prostheses or implant where loss of limbs been replaced by some of these kind of implants, right? So they are structurally providing some kind of support. They ensure the functionality of the limb. However, they do not have any connections with biological system. They are independent devices, correct? So no, they are basically a non-biological devices, but they are giving a mechanical support to uh, individual, right? However, none of them are basically it's augmentations, but this is not the regeneration. So can we think of regenerating the human tissue? uh, I would say not truly we can regenerate each and every part of the human tissue, but yes, to some extent we can try to do it. I'll give you some examples shortly. These are very common methods where people are trying to do grafting if somebody has lost the tissue. Types of grafting. All of this grafting have advantage, disadvantage, limitations. The loss of the lack of the donor, the demand of the tissue, and all of these are major hurdle for all grafting procedures. So, what is the uh, best alternative if we really want to grow the human tissues? So, yes, we can think of doing some of these strategies where we can grow a tissue or organ in laboratory, number one. We are also trying to do regeneration in the on site itself, means the in vivo regenerations where you give something to the patient or give something at the site of regeneration and tissue will start regenerating there itself. So yes, we or the community is trying to do two way of regenerations. One is in the laboratory and implanted back to the patient. Number two, yes, giving something to the patient in terms of materials, any biological materials, and expecting the tissue to be regenerated in the human itself. So this is how regeneration is, creating a challenge for us, and these are the two possible way by which a scientific community is trying to answer it. Now, the most important question is how to grow human tissue. Either you grow inside or you grow in the laboratory. Now, growing a human tissue is very similar to mimicking. So we understand, right? Mimicking is something where you observe something and try to replicate it, and this is the best strategy to mimic something, right? So many of the international manufacturer does, once a product is launched in the market, and if you really want to make a copy of it, you do a reverse engineering. You start opening this entire device, look at the circuit, look at its all component, try to indigenize it. You try to make your own innovation in the existing device, prepare another device and start selling it and comparing the existing device. So that's a reverse engineering. What I'm going to discuss about is that how do you mimic? More or less, they are very similar. So until unless we don't understand what we are growing, we cannot grow. So I'll give you shortly the examples that how we should understand a biological tissue from engineering perspective. So this is a one example where a lotus leaf mimicking has been done. So all of you know lotus leaf is very popular in surface sciences where people consider it as a non-wetting surface. So despite of living in water, it always behave as non-wetting surface. If you look at the scanning electron micrograph of lotus leaf, you can see a small, nano-sized projections are coming out of the entire surface of lotus leaf, and this basically covered by a small wax deposition. So every shoot, every spike present on lotus leaf is covered by a waxy material. So whenever a water drop sit on it, it does not spread, because of wax. It is basically hydrophobic, so it does not allow any hydrophilic substance to spread over it. Right now, people have tried to mimic this surface, and they have tried to generate such hydrophobic shoots like structures, and they have done a contact angle studies where they have observed that yes, creating such spiky surface with a hydrophobic property will help us in a mimicking the lotus leaf. Right? This is a precise mimicking approach. So there is a two types of mimicking here they have performed. One is structural mimicking, where they have mimicked the lotus leaf microstructure. This spiky architect they have built it. That's called structural mimicking. Now, by virtue of structural mimicking and ensuring the composition or the property of the composition is same to the lotus leaf, they have also mimicked the functional property. So, this structured mimicked surface is also giving the same extent of hydrophobicity, and it does not allow water drop to spread. So what they did, they have not structurally mimicked the property. By virtue of structural mimicking, they also got the functional property. So there is a strong relation between structure and function. Okay. Now similar approach we will see we should do it for growing the human tissue. So if you really think of growing a human tissue, uh, uh, how do we do it? So to do it, that kind of tissue formations, we need to understand how a bone is or any other tissue is look alike, right? So I have given one example of a human bone where I'll try to explain you that what are the component we should understand and then how do we go ahead with mimicking. So this is a standard diagram of bone where outermost is the periosteum covering, then we have a compact bone and followed by a spongy bone which is completely infiltrated by blood vasculature system. These purple dots are the cells. So there is a specific organization. It's not a random tissue. It is a well structured tissue where all the human cells are arranged in a circular manner, and they have been supported by a central canal where blood is diffusing in and out and reaching to each of these concentric rings of the bone. And there are multiples of these concentric regions, followed by, in as you reach from outermost compact bone to the center of the bone, we have a spongy region which basically giving lighter weight to the bone. So indeed, if you look at from structural perspective, there are distinct structure in bone. You have a porous nature of bone. Then as you go towards the end or periphery, it's become very compact. However, it's a cellular, right? So if you take out and if you really want to mimic the bone, we will split bone into three major components. So most important component of a bone is called cell, right? So it's one of the biological component of bone is consist of cell. There are different type of cells present in bone which are responsible for bone synthesis, bone homeostasis, osteoporosis. All bone physiological functions are actually regulated by cell. The second component of bone, if you look at, is the material from which it has been built. So there are many biomolecules used to constructing this bone. There are many biomacromolecules like collagen, lots of glycosamine glycans. There are different GEG molecules. There are many other biological entities. Plus, bone also consists of inorganic salts. It has hydroxyapatite, calcium, phosphorus. There are many minerals being consumed for building the bones. Okay. So, and the last component is, this raw material is used in a very particular way. So, if you look at every tissue, so this is a bone cells and the space. So, these are the bone cells, osteoblast or osteocytes, and they are connected well with small canal-like structures, and in between this region is basically called as bone matrix, and these bone matrix are pre-abundantly present in entire bone. So basically, this bone matrix is giving the strength to the bone, and this bone matrix is largely consist of extracellular matrix. I'll shortly show you what's extracellular matrix. But apart from cell, all the region outside the cells we call is as extracellular matrix, and this extracellular matrix is largely contributing in the providing the porosity to the bone. It is also providing a mechanical support to the bone. Now there are three major category. I try to classify bone in these three category. So we have a cells, we have materials which are making the bones, and we have a structural geometry made by this material. Now, if we try to see how to make an artificial bone, we have to look at all these three components carefully. The first component, cell, which we cannot mimic. Cell we cannot make. We have to borrow the cells from the patient, or we have to rely on stem cells. Whatever it is, we are not going to create these cells. So we cannot mimic these cells. We have only two options: take it from patients or take the stem cells. So we are not going to do anything with cells. Now let's look at the another component is the biochemical components. So yes, we can use some of this material to build a bone. We can take hydroxyapatite, we can take collagen, we can take glycosamine glycans, we can take any of bone extracellular material. Cellular material we are not considering, so we can take any extracellular material and we can use it to create the structure, right? So these materials are making a very specific organization. So you can see compact bone, spongy bone. So we can think to use some of these biomechanical components and integrate with the structural designing, and we can build some kind of scaffold which can mimic the structural property of bone. Structural properties such as mechanical property or porosity, and we'll try to see how to do it, right? So as I said, every tissue in human except blood have a some amount of extracellular matrix, and this extracellular matrix is largely responsible for giving the structural support to any tissue. So if we really want to mimic a human tissue, if we really want to build or a tissue in laboratory, or we want to promote the regeneration in body itself, we have to always pay attention that how to augment extracellular space, which is giving large volume to the human organs, which is giving all mechanical property to the human organs, right? So this is one example I'm giving for bone. And if you look at the bone extracellular space, it's largely consists of collagen fibers, right? So there are a lot of fibers or collagen fibers are present in entire bone. So apart from all inorganic salt, the largest component of bone is collagen fiber. So it's made up of fiber. So now we know that bone matrix is consist of collagen fibers. So fiber is something for us which we can mimic. So I'll tell you these one by one strategies where we'll try to mimic with the new types of biomaterials, right? So what we understood by studying a bone or bone extracellular matrix, number one, that bone matrix is largely consist of inorganic salt and collagen fibers. So we'll try to take that information and try to mimic it. So if you look at all of these collagen fibers which are present in bone, they are very interesting because they are very long fiber. They are very in diameter. If you look at different bone have a different diameter of collagen, and collagen have a very distinct property. So if you really want to mimic the bone from a fiber perspective, we can try to make a scaffold, a material which can fabricate the fibers. So the first way which we can try to mimic the collagen fibers by biomaterials, we can use, I'll shortly show you list of polymers where we can make these kind of fibrous substrate. So this is one example of mimicking the collagen fibers. Now, as I said, mimicking is two-way, structural mimicking and functional mimicking. So structurally, we try to make these kind of fibers by a technique known as electrospinning. I'm sure you might have heard about it. It's a very popular technique these days from the textile industry to biomedical engineering, right? This is a technique which basically its name is electrospinning. You can take out a electro for while spinning is very standard spinning used in the textile industry. However, in all textile industrial fibers or textile fibers are not in the range of nanometer. So what people have done is that they have used a high voltage and therefore it called as a electro spinning. When you applied a high voltage in the process of spinning, because of charge repulsion, this fiber will become further thinner, and therefore this technique is capable to produce nanometer diameter of fibers, right? So structurally, we are trying to make various
Yeah.
nanofibrous scaffold or microfibrous scaffold, which theoretically should mimic the collagen topography, which should mimic the collagen organizations. Yes, these fibers are yet not mimicking the collagen biological property or functional property of collagen. However, at least in topology, in terms of architectures, they are able to mimic the collagen fibers, and these fibers are have a very similar property. They provide a high surface area, very similar to collagen fibers. They are also porous. This is what expected and desirable in bone tissue. So a porous substrates will allow human cells to infiltrate. It will also provide a surface area for all inorganic salt depositions when you implant in the human or animal model. Uh, and this porous surface also allow the waste removal. So all human tissues uh, require two major property: diffusivity. So the oxygen can diffuse, the cells can diffuse inside the scaffold. At the same time, cells and all other waste removal can be taken care, right? So these fibers are structurally fulfilling the requirement of collagen. Now, what's going on in the latest of nanofibers? So you can see there are list of polymers. These are very few polymers. You can see there are many other polymers are existing. I'm only focused on polymers which use for exclusively for human applications, or some of them are FDA approved. So we have a synthetic polymers, list of synthetic polymers like polylactic acid, polyglycolic acid, polylactide, coglycolide, polycaprolactone, vinyl alcohol, polyvinyl pyrrolidone, polyhydroxybutyrate. Similarly, natural polymers like collagen itself can be converted into synthetic fibers. Chitosans, alginate, dextran, agarose, many of the plant gums like guar gum, craigathan gums. There are many plant gums are also used because they are also mimicking some of the human tissue property, right? So there are list of polymers being used. Some of them are FDA approved for making these fibers. So in previous slide, I have shown you one example where fibers were randomly arranged. So if you look at this PPT, here the fibers are randomly arranged. If you look at a human skin, you will find most of the fibers in human skins are randomly organized. So if you use these kind of fibers for human skin, if you use the similar kind of fibers are also present in bone periosteum, the outermost layer of bone, which is very toughest part of the bone, is consist of randomly organized nanofibers. You will find large number of randomly organized nanofibers. But in recent years, in last 5 6 years, we have seen that these nanofibers been reorganized, and there are various type of topology being generated by different advancement in the same technique. These all three images are electrospun fibers. They are microfibers or nanofibers. They've been made by different advancement in the technique, but the purpose of all this imaging is the same. They want to generate different type of patterns, different kind of topology. So multiple type of tissue can be built upon it. So as we are understanding a different tissue topology or tissue architecture, we are trying to make the different kind of fiber organizations, right? And interestingly, this all four, first in the previous slide, and these three fibers have it all different topology. So you can see, this is in 2020. This scaffold by electrospinning company. It's just now they have received the patent on micro. So earlier people were working only on the random fibers. Now people start, or community has started making different kind of patterns out of it, so we can mimic different kind of tissue. So this is a circular arrangement of the fibers. This second case, this is basically done by a process called melt electrospinning, because here the fiber diameter is very, very thick. You can see that the depth of the specimen, it is almost like a 3D printing of the fibers. So we have reached to the scale, to extent of a technology where the same fibers can be deposited back, or they are being arranged in a very specific manner. So we can generate a very defined topology by structurally organizing the fibers. Okay. Now this is third example where we are. This is a bean pattern recently been granted where this hexagonal organizations of nanofiber has been done, and there is a clear boundaries of now. This kind of topologies are very useful in some of tissue regeneration applications where you can grow basically one cell at this place and another cell on this place. One can load one drug on this page and another drug on this page. Now this can give rise a multiple substrate in a smallest area. So there are n number of applications. People are reporting by patterning these kind of uh, nanofibers, right? Uh, if you look at any human organ, tissue we call it when we are growing similar type of cells. When we have a more than one type of cells, we call it as organ, and therefore these kind of substrates are getting very popular response because people are trying to grow one type of cells along with another type of cells. For example, if we are making we are growing the bone cells here. At the same time, people are trying to grow blood cells here because eventually every tissue must get the blood vasculature. In current scenario, integrating two different cells in a single device is the biggest challenge. We cannot integrate two different cells together. However, in natural tissues, every organ consists of multiple tissues. Bone cells plus it has a blood cells, it has a neural cells, it has a muscle cells. So organ is not an independent group of cells. It's a group of bottleneck of most of the tissue engineering applications. So therefore, I said that this kind of patterning are helping a lot in getting variety in this kind of scaffolding technology. So this is something which is very recently been done in the field of nanofabrications. Uh, if we slowly move ahead in nanofabrications, this is another technique called is a coaxial electrospinning. So this is the first A diagram is basically a co-electro spinning setup. As I said you a few minutes ago, spinning is a very normal procedure where spinning is done in the presence of electric volt. So you apply a charge on the nozzle of the spin rate and fiber will ooze out from this nozzle, right? So now people have moved ahead of the single or no solid fibers. Now there are studies. This is the first 2004 study. The first time a coaxial fiber means the core have something else and shell have something else. And this is one example where hollow fibers being made. If you look at the diameter is 100 nanometers. So lumen is approximate 100 nanometer and outermost. So overall it will be like 200 and 250 nanometer of fibers. A fiber which is supposed to mimic the collagen topology. Now, if you really want to functionalize it, you can load some protein into it, you can load some drug into it. So it will be a loaded fibers, right? So that's another advantage of this technique where a coaxial topology can be built apart from a fibrous property. So this is a fiber, but this is a hollow fiber. This is a core shell fiber. So in core, you can load something, right? This is another example where the fiber is spun or fiber is fabricated along with the nanoparticles. So this entire fiber is embedded during the fabrication with the nanoparticles. So this is how people are trying to making more and more efficient fibers, fibers with loaded with proteins, loaded with drugs, and they are loading in coaxial topology. They are loading in term of nanoparticles. They are also reorganizing this fiber in a different topology. So you can see fiber itself has so much of scope. Fiber can be organized in different way. Fiber can be functionalized in a different way, right? So you can functionalize the fibers, you can arrange the fibers. So even we can have a regulation over these two property. We can make very resembling or similar to a collagen fibers, right? So most of the polymer used in fiber making industries, you will find, apart from biology, you will find numerous application of this kind of fibers: coaxial fiber, patterned fiber, nanoparticle loaded fiber, starting from textile, filtrations, biomedical, even defense. You will find the application of these fibers, right? So these are some of the latest innovations happen in case of nanofabrication, and that too electrospinning, right? Now, these are all synthetic fiber what we have discussed so far. Still, there is a one more discipline of nanofibers, which is made of a different material. So what we have seen in previous couple of slides, it was a top-down approach where we took the polymer, solubilized, and we made fiber out of it. Now this is another fibers which is very popular in generating these scaffolds. These materials are generally known as a self-assembled peptides. This is called a bottom-up approach, where we are using the amino acids rather than using the polymers or proteins, right? So this is called a bottom-up approach, where we are selecting certain type of amino acids. Basically, it's a ratio of a hydrophilic and hydrophobic amino acid. When you make the change of this hydrophilic and hydrophobic amino acid, here is one example, EAK 16. So there are 16 amino acid long chain, right? And now we basically design this peptide in such a way that this 16 amino acid polypeptide chain into the water, and you change the pH or some other parameters, this polypeptide chain, 16 amino acid polypeptide chain, will be self-assembled, and they will make the peptide self-assembly, right? So basically, the chain of polypeptides will self-assemble, and they will make a shape. Sometimes it make fiber shapes, ribbons shape, helical structure. There are different kind of topology is produced by no, these peptides, and we call it self-assembly. Why we are calling it is self-assembly? Because we are just synthesizing the monomers. So we have chosen 16 monomers, we polymerize them, and now we have a chain of 16 amino acid. We just drop it into the water. By virtue of their chemical property of amino acid, and by microenvironment, they self-assembled, and they self-assembled in such a way that their assembly generate these kind of topology. Now, these are the materials which are generally known as a self-assembled peptide nanofibers. So, there is a difference between these nanofibers and previously discussed nanofibers. So, previously discussed nanofibers were made out of different type of polymers, maybe natural polymer or synthetic polymer, but it was a top-down approach. We could not reduce the diameter or length of the fiber no below than
Hello,
100 nanometer.
sir.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah.
Rajesh, sir, your PPT is not going to be changed, I think. It is on polymeric nanofiber.
Okay, just a minute. I think sharing might have compromised.
So actually, screen is not coming, sir.
Wait.
Okay,
It just reshare their screen. So I think it will be visible.
just a minute. I'll redo it.
Okay, sir. It's no, it's coming.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is how a self-assembled no fibers been made. Please let me know if I missed previous PPT. So this was the coaxial fibers, and these were the no nanoparticle loaded fibers, which I just now talked about. Uh, this is the self-assembled fibers. Now, what's the difference between polymeric fibers and self-assembled fiber is, as the name says, the polymeric fibers are top-down approach. So we take polymers and we spun and we make the fiber out of it. So we cannot go beyond 100 nanometer of diameter. Whereas in this case, it's a bottom-up approach where we are taking small size amino acid, and the overall length of 16 amino acid is not more than few nanometer. So generally the fiber synthesized out of self-assembled peptides are very tiny. They are very small. Of course, they are very small, so their network is not so mechanically strong, whereas polymeric nanofiber mechanically very strong. So wherever we are expecting reinforcing the tissue, both as I there preferably we should use polymeric fibers. In those cases where injury is small, the amount of patient is small, these kind of fibers can be used because they are very small in the volume. They are mechanically strong, but not strong enough like a polymer. Correct. So we generally use these kind of fibers or self-assembled fibers as injectable scaffold. You can just mix it in the syringe and you inject in the patient's site of regeneration. So in previous fibers, you cannot inject it. You just make a cloth-like substrate and put it on the wound, cover the wound, fill the wound by stuffing those fibers. Now this is the fiber which self-assembled even at the site of the patient. So you just solubilize these peptides and injected at the site of recovery and they will polymerize. So basically they are very popular as injectable scaffold. I'll show you again some of these examples in 3D printing, but no, they are very good, but they are very expensive as compared to electrospun fibers, right? So you can see there are types of fibers. The fiber chemistry, fiber topology, fiber organizations can be manipulated as per your mimicking approach. What you want to mimic. You have wide spectrum of fibers available in front of you. You can choose which technique and which material. Interestingly, in last 10 years, FDA has not approved single new material for biological applications. All of us, either in your biomedical engineering, like you are using titanium, titanium molybdenum, the combination of it, few ceramics and except polylactide, polyglycolite, and polycaprolactone. No new polymers been approved. Most of the work is going on with the existing material. So we have not made a very significant discovery in terms of making new materials. We are not making new materials at all. We are making, majority of us are involved in making the combinations of existing material in new fabrication designs, because existing material is fair enough. So people are trying to make it more and more functionally mimicking material. We are able to do structurally up to very good extent, right? So therefore, even in the field of fiber, so many innovations has been done. Now, so this is a atomic force microscopy of the self-assembled nanofibers. It's a very low concentration, so you can see a very dispersed fiber. This is how self-assembled fibers look like. Okay. Now I'll take you another example where structural mimicking is done not from based on the collagen. If you take out the collagen, you will see most of the human tissues are stuffed, filled with another molecules which we call it as proteoglycans. These are basically kinds of polysaccharides which are filled in our tissue. So all the viscoelastic property of our tissue, the elastic property of our tissues are because of elastin and proteoglycans. So proteoglycans are basically cushioning our tissue, right? So they provide cushioning effect to human tissue and they are mostly negatively charged. chondroitin sulfate, keratin sulfate. These are the proteoglycans, and all of them are negatively charged. So basic advantage of proteoglycan charge is they absorb the water. So I'll give you analogy of proteoglycan. It's like a sponge in our chair. So if you put it in water, it swell lot of water. If you squeeze it, it will take out all the water, and moment to release the pressure, it will reabsorb the water. Precisely, proteoglycans have the same property. They are porous, they load lot of water molecules, they swell, right? So, no, if you really want to do a mimicking, not via fibers strategy, you can also get the what are the GEGs or proteoglycans are present in human tissue and how to mimic it. So, micrograph you can see on right hand side. This is basically a hydrogel. A hydrogel means a gel which can swell in water, and therefore it's called as hydrogel. Is made out of a chitosan. Chitosan, chitosans. There are many names, right? They are generally being made out of crustacean cells. So no, it is basically a proteoglycan. The same or almost similar protein in the human tissue. So we use this. We are trying to mimic the material property by using the chitosan, which is similar to proteoglycans in humans, and in fabrication we are using a technique called hydrogelation. So we get this kind of topology, a interconnected macroporous network. So every pore is connected, so it can swell the water. If you squeeze it, it can release the water. So these are some of the examples where hydrogels, there are many names, hydrogels, microgels, nanogels, but if you look at all of the entire family of gel used for scaffold, they have a similar property. Shape is, so nanogel are smaller in diameter, microgel larger, macropore super structure. So, but ultimately all of them are gel, all of them are swelling the water, all of them are behaving like a sponge, right? So these are some of the examples. So the property, as I said, they are very porous, they have a very good swelling capacity, and because of swelling capacity they give resilience to our tissue. So if you press them, they will bounce back, right? Many of these spongy tissues are basically space filling. So many of the human tissues have space filling tissues, right? Like adipocytes or these tissues, right? So they can fill large amount of space. So if you are making a bone implant, no, this kind of tissues can fill the space, right? And the most important property of this hydrogel, it's a customizable. So you might have seen, no, while we are making sofa at home, you can cut the sponge the way you want. You can bend it, you can stuff it, you can stuff it like anything. Right? Similarly, this is a very similar material, so you can customize it based on your site of regenerations. Uh, you can mimic the geometry of the wound by making such kind of material. So like this is a chitosan scaffold. This is chitosan gelatin. So gelatin is a denatured collagen. So people have used mixed with chitosan and gelatin. So they have a combination. So chitosan is GEG polysaccharide mimicking component. Gelatin is collagen mimic component. So what they did, they mixed two property and made gel out of it. You have gel, which is mimicking proteoglycans. You also have a material which is mimicking collagen, and topology is gel like structure. Um, this is a chitosan microgels. These are more popular in drug delivery applications. This can be loaded in scaffold also. So this is one example you can see. This is chitosan collagen, and these are the small gels are combined with the another hydrogel. So one can load different drugs, protein, or even human cells in these microgels, and you can then eventually load this microgel into the this kind of hydrogels. Correct. This is what precisely been done in 3D printing, which I'm going to discuss next. Uh, so bio ink. So you will know, if you look at the entire catalog of bio inks, these are the only material used. Most of the bio inks are using chitosan, gelatin, alginate, this kind of polymers, and they are also using bio ink loaded with the nanogels or microgels. So basically, bio ink is a latest innovation in the field of 3D printing, but it is truly inspired from hydrogel because all inks are jellyfine. So truly, uh, it's a hydrogel, basically a bio ink, but it is been made in a different way. So hydrogel is extensively used for wound dressing, tissue engineering. You can also see a lot of non-biological application. Separation, purification, all our water cartridge at home are made up of some kind of hydrogel, cellulose acetate are the materials generally being used. So hydrogel is commercially, uh, very popular, and it is being used for many other industry. Entire purification and separation industry is these days using the hydrogel technology. So it has a good contribution in regenerating human tissue as well, because it mimics the topology and chemistry of proteoglycans, right? Okay. Now let's go to another aspect of structural mimicking is, which I am sure you know more than me, is 3D printing. You are more familiar with the 3D printing and you might have seen various examples. So these are like some of the examples of scaffoldings or scaffolds are made out of standard 3D printers, right? Extrusion based 3D printers where you extrude the polymers and get it deposited on a pattern which you want. Now these are all examples used for mostly for bone tissue regenerations. So 3D printing is in market for last 10 years, right? Especially, bone tissue engineering is using 3D printing from last 10, 15 years, where they are printing hydroxyapatite, hydroxymulalides. May not be so complicated pattern, but still they are doing. So it's not a new technique. It's well-known technique, but the scale has gone up. But all of a sudden, it's become very popular now. Why? We'll see shortly. But if you look at any of these scaffolds, they are perfectly structural mimic. So if you really want to mimic structurally a tissue or a organ, we can do it. But does they functionally mimic the property? Are they behaving like what we are expecting? For example, cardiac tissues, are these kind of scaffold can have a viscoelastic property like contraction and relaxation. So without cell or without responding to the cells, these devices, irrespective how good they are of no use. You have to make it biologically relevant. We have to make it to function them as a biological tissue, right? And therefore, we have got a concept called 3D bioprinting. In principle, yes, it is very similar to uh, printing any object, but we have given a concept called a bioprinting. So how to make existing 3D printing technique relevant to regenerating the human tissue, right? Number one, yes, we can structurally mimic the tissue. We can make this kind of structures where vasculature is visible. We can make this kind of artificial ear. I am sure all of you must have seen this kind of artificial ears in most of 3D printed presentations.
Hello, Vasita sir.
G.
Sir, Utkarsh here. The slide which is showing on the screen is hydrogels as scaffold. So have you changed the slide?
Yeah, I'm keep changing.
So it is not visible to us, sir. Why it is happening, I
Mhm.
don't know. Just the
Okay. Okay, I'll reshare. I'll try one more time. I'm sorry, maybe some interruption in internet is discontinuing.
It's okay, sir.
Is it visible? Structural mimicking?
Sir, yes, sir. Now it is
Sir,
visible.
Yeah, please. I'm really sorry. Please interrupt me in between if whenever you think that the slides are not changing. So this was the previous slide where I was discussing that this kind of structural mimics were very popular for almost a decade, but they were failed to take off because they were no very fascinating, but they were not encouraging the cells. They were not supporting the biological functions, and therefore no 3D bioprinting become no these days is the most happening discipline where we are having these kind of vasculature structures or which we are having to mimicking the topology of ear. So this kind of appendages, these kind of organs are these days being printed well, right? So what's a new into it? How come a technique which was existing for last few years and all of a sudden it's become so popular? So what innovation has gone into it is basically called the BioInk. So I've just changed my PPT to the next slide. It's called BioInk. So the printing remains same. The procedure remains same. The only thing which has changed is the material which we were depositing. So earlier we were depositing like PLA, ABS, polycaprolactones, which most of them were not biologically so active. So people have made a lot of discovery in the field of bioink. Interestingly, most of the bioink developed in last 5 years. And what are the bioinks? So bioinks are mostly those polymers which I have discussed in hydrogels like chitosan, gelatin, collagen, hyaluronic acid, alginate. These are all soft materials, soft polymers, and most of them are solubilized in water. Most of them are easily polymerized by very small addition of cross-linking agent. So what's the advantage of using such biopolymers is we can actually mix a lot of things into it. We can mix drug into it, we can mix cells into it, and all of these entities are very sensitive. So we want a polymer, we want a procedure to be in such a way that it will encapsulate all these biological entity without loss of bioactivity. Okay, and therefore that's what I said, that these all bioinks are basically, when you print them, you are printing them into a gelation media. So these media generally contain the gelations or cross-linking reagents. So moment your polymer ooze out from the nozzle, printing nozzle, it polymerized. If you look at this entire scaffold, the bioprinted scaffold is basically, in my understanding, it's a hydrogel. It's nothing else. But people have called it as bio ink because no, you are writing it, you are printing something out of it rather than making a standard scaffold. And the major difference here is they are printing with no drugs, protein, or cells itself. Earlier, people have reported the same hydrogel loaded with cells, but they were not printing it. They were just filling it. They were making a random shapes out of it. Now the change in technology is that we are capable to print the polymers loaded with cells, and you can take this printed scaffold directly into the, so they are quite big in the size, you can use it for various purposes. So you can see the list of applications where bioprinted scaffold are extensively used, but basic principle is same. The fundamental is not changed yet, that use a naturally abundant polymers which is biocompatible, which has a self cross-linking property, soluble in water, so you can load cells and other molecules. That's all. And you can have a implant, right? Uh, so in this next slides, you can just see, I'm not going to discuss all of these technique, but what is the interesting part in all these four techniques, like direct writing, your inkjet printing, stereolithography, or laser-induced forward transfer. In all of these things, we generally use the same polymer, which generally have a very no low viscosity. And if you can see, the most common property in all of these polymer is rapid gylations. You look at the bottom one, rapid gylations, rapid gylations, rapid gylations. So what do you want? You want a material, a polymeric material, where you load your cells or any biological components, and you just ooze it out, throw it out from the needle, and you expect that if they should polymerize instantly, right? So there are different type of techniques, but mostly they are using polymer based bioinks. And I can tell you that what I have named earlier are the same material used as bioink in most of the 3D printing or bio 3D printing techniques, right? Okay, so I have discussed few technology advancements in existing technology like fibers, like gylations, or 3D printing, right? So interestingly, in all of these techniques, which are no front runner in regeneration or tissue engineering or biomedical engineering, are using the same existing polymers, but with a different perspective of fabrications. That's all. Okay. The second part of my presentations, I'll try to finish it on time, is techniques. So I'm not going to discuss any standard technique like electron microscopy or any other technique. I'm only going to discuss two techniques basically, which are very new and which are getting a lot of momentum because of advancement in 3D bioprinting or because of scaffolding, right? uh, in all overall biomedical field, or which includes tissue engineering or regenerative medicines. These are like three set of techniques which are extensively used. All of our device generally goes through different kind of testing. It goes for in vitro testing, then vivo testing, animal testing, human testing. All of this testing is standard for all biomedical devices. Microfluidics is another set of technique which is getting momentum because of low scale. At small scale, you can do lot of fluidics can run through it, and we can do multiple characterizations over it. And there's one microscopy which is become very popular these days, is called BioFM. Right? I'll try to integrate at least two of them. So I'll first go ahead with the biological characterizations. All of you know what is a testing of biomedical devices. We just grow the cells on it, and we see how human cells are responding to it. If cells are responding well, we says, okay, device is compatible with human cells. Let's go for animal. That's what most of us do, including me, right? But when we grow the human cells on plastics, when we grow the human cells on tissue culture plastics, glasswares, no, cells behave something abruptly. And this is the one example. So our human cells are generally not tuned to grow on a flat surface at all. Human cells are supposed to be grow in a three-dimensional environment. Our tissues is a three-dimensional tissue. It is not supposed to grow cells in a flat manner. But our own all in vitro characterizations, our every biomedical devices is
कंबाइन ना चले हाँ
so all our biomedical devices are basically tested in a 2D cells, not on the 3D. We have nothing in between. When we test, we finish our characterizations on in vitro testing. We straight go for in vivo or animal study. Without, in fact, we know that in vitro testing is not 100% foolproof. We have no choice, and we straight go for animal models. This slide, I'm trying to explain you that what we do in vitro testing, we generally grow human cells on 2D substrates. This is a flat plastic dish, glass slides. And we take out these cells, we put it with our biomedical device, maybe scaffold, maybe sensor, maybe probe, and we just see whether how your cells is responding. Finish. But when we take these 2D cells, they are not so good. But when you grow these cells into three-dimensional environment, the cells respond very differently. I cannot show you some examples, but in drug discovery, it is making a huge contribution. So what people have started doing it, rather than growing the cells on a 2D surface, people start growing cells on a three-dimensional media scaffold, right? And we call it as, there are different name. We call it as organoids, we call it as spheroid, call it as a tumoroids. See, organoids means we are growing more than two type of cells together, and not only on 2D surface, we are growing them in a three-dimensional surface, right? So we are using different bioinks, we are using different scaffolds like hydrogel I have shown just now, even fibers or 3D scaffolds. So where we have a depth in the device, and we are trying to grow cells on those three-dimensional device rather than a flat surface. So whenever we want to do a testing of a device, now these days it's become very popular that we should test our device by cells are growing in organoids or spheroids. So cells will be more closer to its native environment. Now in this particular case, cells are grown, this is a cancer cell, MDNB breast cancer cell line, were grown with another uh, cancer cell line, right? MCF7. So you have a group of two cells which are growing together, and they are growing in a three-dimensional environment. They are not growing on a flat surface. And because of this kind of dimensionality and multi-cell culture, our in vitro system is more closer to in vivo system or very close to native tissue. So we are one step ahead of 2D culture, what I would say. Or I would say we are one step closer to the our native tissue or animal tissue. So far what we were using, we were just growing one type of cells on a plastic pairs, and we were testing our device. Now if we really want to test our device, we should use such kind of organoids. All kind of organoids are not available for all the cells, but this is very happening field where people are trying to grow multiple cells in a three-dimensional microenvironment. So cells become more and more similar to their native or their source, right? And those kind of organizations are known as organoids. You can search spheroids, you will also find the tumoroids. Now I'll club it with microfluidics. Now this is, I'm sure you know much better than me what are the microfluidics. So microfluidics are very small micro devices where you are flowing the fluid. Now this is one example where a microfluidics been used for generating the 3D tissue, right? So when a tissue becomes three-dimensional tissue, no, growing cells on a flat surface is very easy. You just put into a cell culture flask, provide them media, they are happy, finished. But when you convert this 2D layer of cells into three-dimensional tissue, it is ever growing. It's keep growing. And as tissue keep growing, tissue become very stiff, and the core of tissue is continuously deprived from oxygen. That's why I told you in beginning that vasculature is a very important aspect for regeneration. If we really want to grow human tissue, we must answer this question: how to ensure the supplies? You have to ensure supplies. Supplies of what? Supplies of oxygen, removal of wastage, supplies of nutrition. So as you grow in the size, it's like a plumbing. If you keep growing the building, you have to ensure that water and electric supply is through, right? So basically, our vasculature, our epithelial system is a plumbing of our tissue, and they ensure that each and every corner of the cells is properly supplied with oxygen and removal of the waste. Now, what I showed you in case of organoids, it's become challenging. So that's a limitation of organoids. Most of the organoids cannot grow after some certain micrometer of the diameter because there is a crisis of oxygen. there is a crisis of supplies, right? So this is one study where microfluidics being used, and you can see there are two different no channels where culture media is flown through, and human cells are grown here. Now this is the reason where dead cells are present. So there is a basically media being supplied from all over these cells. No, this is a necrotic zone. We call it as necrotic zone because there is a deficiency of oxygen. But still, at such a small scale, people were able to grow the human 3D organ with a minimum dead cells. So there is a proper perfusion of the media throughout the surface in a very regulated manner. And similarly, there are so many organoids being developed in such a small area. So if you really want to test any biomedical product like nanoparticles and sensors, no, this kind of devices can be used for screening the any of the biomaterials or biomaterial based devices. So they are far better than normal in vitro testing. First of all, you are getting your device exposed to organoids, and that too in a multiple organoids in a very small area. So people are trying to combine microfluidics technique with spheroids or organoids, and they are coming up with a lot of new devices which can more efficiently screen the biomedical product in the shortest time. Okay. So you will see, if you go through literature these days, you will find the organ on chip is become very popular. This is same. These are basically microfluidics devices where people are trying to grow organoids of different tissues. You will find organoids for skin, organoids for liver. So there are different organoids being grown on microfluidic devices. And while I'm saying organoids means people are trying to grow more than one type of cells together in such a small uh, devices. So hopefully in next future and coming futures we will able to see the more number of devices where multiple types of cells are growing on the same platform. So in a single channel, you may observe that there are osteo or bone tissues, followed by maybe there's a blood vasculature or endothelial. So we might expect that group of cells might have grown in a same channel, and you can screen your entire product in one go. So this is something which is very interesting happening, and this is largely done by biologists. Of course, there is a contribution from material, but here biologists are playing a very important role by characterizing these organoids, whether they are biologically similar or relevant or not. Right. So this is how these techniques are now taking the entire biomedical or especially tissue engineering or regeneration field. Okay, uh, this is another technique, although it is bit irrelevant with so far what I have talked, but I'll try to connect it. No, all of these organoids, most of these scaffolds are generally being characterized by various techniques like electron microscopy, confocal microscopy, uh, but atomic force microscopy. So I assume most of you are well aware of atomic force microscopy. Briefly, I'll just explain you that it's called a atomic force microscope. In a layman language, there is a probe. This is a cantilever basically, and this is a tip. It's a tip or a probe which just run over the surface, and it goes through the surface and it look at the surface topography. So there is a contact mode, there is a non-contact mode. It can touch the specimen and it cannot touch. It just tap, it oscillate over the specimen, and the movement of this cantilever surface is generally observed by the laser. So laser is focused on the tip, and deflection of the laser will be recorded on photodiode, right? So as your tip move ups and down, as your surface become bumpy or hill and valleys will come in front of the tip of cantilever, Your cantilever will keep moving, keep oscillating, and these oscillations or this modulation in the tip movement will be reflected by the laser on photodiode, and that's how a atomic force microscopy images being generated. Now, what's new about it, AFM versus bio-AFM? Now, most of the good AFM images are done on dry surface. So we didn't have a possibility to look at the biological specimen, or we didn't have a possibility to touch the tip on a specimen where your cells are growing, where biological substance being coated. So it means biological substance or cells are bit sticky in nature. So when you run your cantilever or tip on the substrates, your tip will stick to it, right? And therefore, people have made this very small, discovery. It's basically the entire principle will remain same. And we have made, no, people have come up with the idea of bio FM. So bio FM is one such technique where small modification being done in where we house the samples. So basically, um, the sample holder where we are keeping the samples, if you actually freeze your samples very precisely in such a way that the glueness of your specimen is slightly reduced. So basically, if it's a water, you can freeze it for a while, right? By adding some anti-freezing agent, you can slow down the freezing process, and you make sure that your object, your specimen, especially in this case cells, is not going to experience a drastic change. There are specialized tip also available for biological specimen as well, but we can, using this small modification, we can actually observe the human cells or behavior of human cells. So you can now, using a bio-FM, one can actually touch the human cells. One can touch the all organelles like nucleus, mitochondria, and you can see in this particular case, the cell has been just seeded. After 12 hours and 24 hours, you can see the cells start spreading. And here the cells is, I think, going to be slightly in a division mode. And you can see all the podial structures are clearly visible. You can also see the height of these cells, what's basically height of the cell. Now, this kind of imaging was not possible so far. We could not able to uh, look at dimensionality in the spreaded cells on the surface by any existing microscopy like transmission microscopy or ACM. Never. It was not possible to look at the dimensional aspect. In fact, with electron microscopy, the procedure of sample preparation itself, change the cell morphology. So if you really want to see real-time behavior of cell, bio-AFM is one such technique which is helping a lot in all biomedical devices. It is very popular now these days in the 3D printed scaffold also. All the bio ink are jelly in the nature. They are dimensional, right? So if you really want to see how cells are growing on these kind of bio inks, no, bio FM become very popular. Operational wise, it indeed required certain extent of technique where one should be trained how to process the samples and how to analyze the sample. However, it's making a good contribution in doing the live cell imaging on most of the surfaces. No, it is become very popular in regenerative medicines also. Okay, so these are some of the technique which are probably directly linked with the materials, biomaterials, uh, where dimensionality is uh, very important. So if I try to summarize what I have spoke so far is the dimensionality is something missing from our conventional approaches, where we never paid attention to uh, no dimensionality. That tissue is a three-dimensional. In last probably 1 decade in biomaterials, people start addressing this concern, and now you can see the techniques, characterization techniques are coming in existence where dimensionality, depth of specimen is also given the equal weightage, right? And most of biomedical devices have a major disadvantage is that they are opaque. they are temperature sensitive. So no, majority of the technique cannot be used with existing microscopy, existing spectroscopy. Right. So BioFM is one of those technique which has been actually customized for very particular application. Okay, so no, whatever I have talked about, what is the scope for it? So I would say, most immediate contributions what we can see in the literature is that it is helping a lot in a preclinical drug screening, right? So most of these devices which I have talked about, initially they are meant, entire discipline was started for the artificial organ, and now it is serving them. So we have now various tissue, we have various organs which has grown in the laboratory, um, because none of them has qualified for human application except skin. So artificial skin is the only FDA approved regenerative implant so far. No other device has been approved by FDA. So it's called Dermagraft or Epligraft are two companies who are selling artificial skin, whereas all other tissue engineering tissues are now used for drug screening or biomedical devices, right? And most interesting part is that doing these things, doing the testing or preclinical trials, you don't need any approval. Approval in the sense because you are not going to the human animals, so you don't need animal ethical clearance. What do you need? It's just a laboratory. So it's basically a organoids. It's a no. It's providing intermediate. So you can go ahead and one can finish lot of work with these preclinical models. And once you have good data, you can approach for animal study. So you can reduce your dependency on animal testings, right? So you can use any of the existing scaffolding, use any of these technique like organoids, and finish your lot of work without going for animals, right? And of course, at last, a futuristic approach that we might expect to have a personalized organ or tissue available. Of course, after the discovery of like bioprinting or bioink, I hope that in next few years we may expect some extent of some depth of tissues being produced. Okay, so with this I'll stop, and indeed I have not gone into depth of any of this technique, not even in the materials, but I try to make you aware that scaffolding or growing a tissue in a dimensional aspect is very challenging, and it's raising a lot of questions, but it's also promoting lot, it's fostering a lot of innovations in the field of biomaterials or tissue engineering. So thank you very much, and excuse me for interruption in the PowerPoint presentations. I'm open for all the questions.
Thank you, sir. Your session was very much informative. You have covered all the aspects of biomaterials, natural, artificial. It was really informative. And the other thing I want to mention is the organoid. It was really interesting. The issues how will grow on the surface and 3D space. It was really interesting. Sir, I want to ask one question regarding the scaffolding. You have showed a lot of about the scaffold design and different scaffolding technique. I want to ask you, is there any platform or software which is available for scaffold design? And if we make a specific design to
Okay. Probably, I could not able to hear your question completely, but what I understood is that you are asking that is there any platform available for computationally or any tools are available for efficient designing, right? So the answer is yes, there are tools available which are helping. No, there are a lot of people who are doing different modeling, but no, as such, we generally use MATLAB, or there are few other no design softwares which are no. So what we are doing in computationally largely is that how fluids are moving, how fluid distribution is taking place. So basically, we are no what people are reporting or what literature says that you can model the design, you can optimize the design in terms of stress bearing, like mechanical stress bearing, how the stress will be distributed on biomedical implants or this scaffold, uh, how fluid will be distributed on this scaffold, right? So this kind of designing are possible computationally.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, another question from my side. You have given a good example of osteoporosis in the bone tissue implantation and the muscle tissue implantation and regeneration laboratory. I want to ask a question regarding the nervous tissue, sir. Is there any possibility to regenerate a nerve cell
Hmm.
in the laboratory, or whether there are techniques available or any advances in implantation of a nerve tissue in a patient? If they are suffering from any neurobiological disease.
Hmm. See, from scaffolding point of view, is not a challenge in case of source of the cells. Example, bone can easily, the bone cells can be obtained. Bone cells can be differentiated by stem cells. But problem with the nervous tissue, almost all the nervous tissue, the source of the cells are the biggest disadvantage. So if you really know, of course, there are a lot of scaffolds being reported for nerve tissue regeneration, spinal cord regeneration. So my entire postdoc was on spinal regenerations. But the problem with all of this regeneration, so every time for every implant, we used to sacrifice the animal, take out his medulla oblongata regions, and take out the nerve cells from that place, and immediately use it for the implants. Now, for all neural tissue engineering, of course, the challenge is the unique property of cell. So cell is so specialized that moment you take out from the host and implant it back, the duration, the time gaps, if you grow it for like 6 days, I can tell you 50% of cells are gone. There are no more neural cells. They differentiate. So that's the biggest limitation in case of neural transplantations or muscle implantation via tissue engineering approach. Because when you implant back to the patient, if you have taken 10 cells, you are not going to implant 10 cells. You at least make 10,000 cells out of it. So that's how you expect the regeneration will take place. But while doing 10 cells to 10,000 cells in vitro, we actually lose most of the cells. Lose in the sense we lost its functionality because they are highly specialized. So this is the limitations. But yes, people are trying to do. They are what are trying to do. They are making conductive scaffolds. So I have seen lot of literature where conductive scaffolds being made, and you grow cells on these conductive scaffolds and give a very pico current. So cells will experience the similar physiological situations, and those implant can be used for nerve tissue engineering. But yes, it has a long way to go because moving to a very specialized cells are always challenging. This is true for nervous cells. This is also true for cardiac cells. So cardiac patches are also facing the same challenges.
Yes, yes. very much. Sir, there are a lot of questions from the participant. You can also in the chat box. One of the question from one of the participants: specification for material used for 3D printed organs. Any
Yes.
specification for materials used
See,
for 3D print?
if you look at the literature, people are buying commercial materials. People are also making their own bioinks. There are a lot of research. So I think the basic property is number one, it should gelify. You should have a mechanisms to cross-link. Number two, the material must be biocompatible because you are calling it as bioink. So you must be loading either protein, growth factor, or drug, or you are loading a cell. It must be bioink because of loading of any biological substitute. So your material should be compatible with biological entity. Largely, it should solubilize in buffer or water, so your biological entity will not be affected. Number two, it should be gelable. You can gel it by very standard cross linker, which should not affect your biological entity, because in any process your biological entity should not be hampered. Or you can take for any light based photo cross linking agent or some of those ways by you can. So gelability, or I would say cross linking, and biocompatibility are two major uh, requirement for bioink. And many people are making their own bioink. Many laboratories are making a different kind of bioinks by using. In India also there are many institutes. IIT Gandhinagar, I know, IIT Mumbai people are trying to make different kind of bioinks by using chitosan or gelatin.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, another question from one participant, that where is India in development of materials for organ printing?
Mm, yes. So far, India is doing good because of some institutes like I know Sri Chitra Institute of Medical Science and Technology, Trivandrum. It's one of the leading institute uh, in India, far ahead of any of the existing IIT or other institute. So they have already commercialized many biomedical implants. They have also heart wall is one of them. Your blood bags are some of the popular products, but they have also come up with skin patches, collagen patches. If I'm not wrong, that is also, this is a wound healing or wound dressing devices. It's commercially available. In fact, in India now there are many startup has come up. I know at least three or four startup who are working on collagen based devices for wound management. Even in Gujarat, we have two companies who are working and developing the sponge, collagen sponge, which can be used for wound dressing and wound management applications. There are many companies who are working on nanofibrous based wound dressing material or skin implants. Uh, there are startups which are working on nanofibers based sensors. That's all happening in India. So, in my understanding, of course, we all are bounded by certain number of material. So nobody is working on development of new material. Of course, we have to just pick up. But people are, lot of people, government organizations and many of the startup are working a lot, and there are a lot of job opportunities are also coming. So in fact, you look at many government scheme, DBT, DST, there are many scheme exclusively meant for regenerative medicines. With this name only, you will find the schemes for regenerative medicines. So I think it's rising.
Thank, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. There are a lot of questions, but we are taking only one question from the participant. Last question. If you have, dear participant, if you have the further question, you can put it in a chat box. We will sort it out after the uh, day one. Only one question I am taking from the audience. Vasita sir, there is a
Ji.
question that are there any regulation policy for the use of printed organs like we have for the medical device? So for medical device, we have the regulations. So is there any regulation for the printed organ for the use onto the patient?
I think the recently what government has passed these new implant policies. There also they have not considered exclusively this 3D printed organ because it has just reached to a scale of no animal trials. But I hope that it will be classified shortly. As of now, in India, we don't have any regulations for uh, 3D printed scaffold, bioprinted scaffold.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir,
Thank
can
you
I
for
ask
sharing.
one voice question?
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Sir, actually, in CGCRI, Central Glass and Ceramic Research Institute in Kolkata, they are using one 3D printing technology. That is, they are actually generating different type of devices, but that is artificial. But now, in case of in vivo system, to generate some parts of the body in mimetic route, so how it can be controlled?
Control in the sense use or uh, in
Suppose
term.
in mimetic route, yeah, anyone want to generate the one part of the hand. So how
Yes,
it will be controlled to generate the fingers and like that, the different parts
yes,
of that
so,
artificial. So any
yes, I
in
agree.
because it is generating in vivo, but not externally.
Yes, yes. But I think no, this will be like far-fetched dream to generate entire organ even by 3D printed because like finger is not consist of single tissue. It has a bone, it has a muscles. So whatever study been reported for 3D printed, especially with bioinks, majority of them are using one or two cells. So I think for next few years it will be just remain as space filling rather than growing new tissue. Max a new tissue which we can expect is the vascularizations, endothelializations like blood vessels or some of these tissues. But I think organs like skin, it will be very difficult because it has a two distinct tissue like bone, tough tissue, and a soft tissue. Probably
Yes, sir.
in
Yes.
front line, probably you can see most of the soft tissues we can expect can be mimicked, not the very complex tissues like skin. As I said, why skin is being launched first is because
Yes.
relatively it's very simple tissue.
Okay, sir.
Yes,
Okay, thank you, sir.
thank you.
Thank you, Vasita sir, for giving the insight about the different polymers and the biomaterials for the biomedical devices. Uh, so we are ending this session. Further question can be entertained through the messages to the MS team. So we are ending this session and we are taking break right now. And the next session will be started at 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. So all can leave this session, and we have already created the link for the second session, and that will be shared into the WhatsApp group.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Vasita sir.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
participant can see